The captain told him that recently 2 people had entered the hidden stage. Both were candidates from the chameleon troupe. Upon hearing this, Khalifa understood. It seemed they were preparing to test the others. Following this, the captain's body began to liquefy, and in the next second, he swiftly moved towards the hidden stage. Meanwhile, Kim Suho and I were dealing with the monsters on the road, which were mid to low 9th grade undead creatures. Although numerous, they posed no threat to Kim Suho and me. What surprised Kim Suho was that, in such a dark environment, I managed to hit the monsters' weak points accurately every time. Thus, he once again acknowledged my strength. Perplexed by this, I suggested we speed up. At every crossroads thereafter, there were monsters, thankfully of consistently low level. Finally, not long after, Kim Suho eagerly called out to me. Upon hearing him, I rushed to a place marked with text, knowing we had reached our destination. Following Kim Suho to a wall, the text above puzzled him. Kim Suho tried to translate it using his watch, and I promptly scanned the text with mine. After getting the explanation, he understood that it was a puzzle. In the original story, even after Kim Suho translated the text, he couldn't solve the puzzle and eventually sent it to Yona, who then consulted the Intelligence Guild for the answer. However, pressed for time, I couldn't let him follow the original plot, so I decisively stated the answer was lightning. The next second, the wall burst into a dazzling light, and the text vanished as the cave shook violently. The stone wall in front quickly began to descend. Seeing this, Kim Suho curiously asked, "So the answer was lightning?" This was actually a story I had heard elsewhere, which I had casually turned into a puzzle. Kim Suho didn't expect me to solve it so quickly, and once again praised me as a genius. Next, we were to officially tackle the dungeon's boss monster. Unbeknownst to us, the captain, who had arrived earlier, had witnessed everything. She was very pleased, appreciating not only my strength but also my clever mind. Although it was just a hidden stage, the fact that I had led Kim Suho here in under 10 minutes proved my abilities were strong. Given that I also possessed the power to subdue jinns, the captain had made her final decision to recruit me into the chameleon troupe. But there was one last thing she needed to confirm: whether I could kill an enemy without hesitation. Just then, the 2 individuals from earlier, having received orders, returned to the hidden stage, albeit a bit lost. Upon discovering the presence of a demon lord, the captain thought I was unaware that the opponent was a jinn and came up with a good plan. She decided to use these 2 jinns to test me. On the other side, Kim Suho and I had reached the boss room. The creature seated in front was instantly recognizable as the dungeon's master, the Chaos Knight. The monster also noticed us and opened its tightly closed eyes. In that moment of eye contact, Kim Suho seemed to see something, and the Chaos Knight suddenly appeared before him. The monster even spoke to Kim Suho. Caught off guard by the monster's speed, Kim Suho was about to draw his sword in retaliation when I loudly called his name, urging him to focus. Regaining his senses, he realized the creature was still seated. Kim Suho couldn't help but wonder, had the monster used teleportation? But he soon understood the reason. It was the opponent's aura that had caused him to see an illusion. From the mid to high levels, humanoid monsters generally can speak. Kim Suho understood that the opponent's strength far exceeded that of any monster they had encountered before. At this moment, the Chaos Knight drew a sword, laughing mockingly, asking if Kim Suho was scared. I was about to remind him when I noticed that Kim Suho had instantly regained his composure. Seeing this, I realized that knowing the opponent was also a swordsman had restored his confidence. Kim Suho's talent is that of a sword saint, destined to stand at the pinnacle of swordsmanship. No swordsman could be his match. I reminded Kim Suho that the monster's true form was the sword it held, and that the voice had also emanated from the sword. What stood there was merely a corpse. He could have reached this conclusion during the fight himself, but there was no time to waste. I told Kim Suho not to attack the monster's body, but to aim directly at the sword instead. I would cover him. Just as Kim Suho was responding that he trusted me, the monster took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. The sudden development caught me off guard, and before I could warn Kim Suho, a terrifying explosion erupted in the cave. The resulting smoke obscured my vision, but the sound of clashing weapons reassured me a lot because Kim Suho had timely blocked the strike. After another intense collision, the 2 distanced themselves. Kim Suho took the opportunity to charge at the monster, and the monster also swung its sword with all its might. But to its surprise, its attack missed, and Kim Suho had already reached its back. By the time the monster turned its head to see, Kim Suho had fiercely stabbed, aiming precisely at the sword in its hand. Unfortunately, the Chaos Knight blocked the strike with its arm, which surprised Kim Suho. He tried to stab further, but found he couldn't penetrate at all. The monster was now very happy, evilly thanking Kim Suho for bringing its body from afar. When Kim Suho found he couldn't continue stabbing, he quickly prepared to draw his sword, only to find it stuck as well. At that moment, the Chaos Knight's killing move was already on its way. At a critical moment, I intervened with a powerful magic bullet, stopping the monster's attack. With my help, Kim Suho finally drew his sword. I told him that the monster had likely guessed from the beginning that we would target its true form. Hearing this, Kim Suho took a deep breath and confidently stated that he would be even more cautious in his next attack. The monster ahead kept laughing, puzzling Kim Suho. What pleased the monster was the burst of power Kim Suho had just unleashed. It had been a long time since it had encountered such a perfect body. What the Chaos Knight most wanted was to quickly possess Kim Suho. After laughing, the monster's arm injury also instantly healed. Seeing this, I was not surprised. Attacking its flesh would have no effect as its true form was the sword. Seeing this, Kim Suho was not only undaunted but charged again at the Chaos Knight. Subsequently, a great battle ensued between them. The sword energy produced by their clashing swords even made me feel as though my skin was being cut. I believed that Kim Suho would surely win, but prolonged fighting was unproductive. In the presence of the Demon Lord's people worried me. At this distance, neither a shotgun nor a sniper rifle would be useful for support. Only a handgun could be used. Kim Suho became increasingly adept in his fight against the monster, and soon the monster's sword emitted a shattering sound. The Chaos Knight found it hard to believe that it was gradually being overwhelmed. More importantly, the ordinary sword in Kim Suho's hand was able to damage its true form and remain intact. This was the power of the Creation Saint magic spell. Realizing that it would lose if the fight continued, the Chaos Knight became instantly enraged. Kim Suho's condition wasn't great either. His hand was numb from the monster's power, but he still managed to smile. With each clash, he became more certain that he was the ultimate winner of this battle. After all, he had a trustworthy teammate. Just as the Chaos Knight was preparing to continue fighting with Kim Suho, I shot its sword-holding hand from the side. As long as the monster's actions were stopped, I believed Kim Suho would not disappoint me. Although this monster was much stronger than expected, Kim Suho swiftly knocked the sword out of the monster's hand and quickly approached the magic sword in the air. In just the blink of an eye, Kim Suho completed his attack. Until he landed, the monster hadn't reacted, and the magic sword could no longer withstand it, immediately disintegrating into pieces. With its true form severed, the monster in front turned to ashes and scattered. Having dealt with the boss monster, all that remained was to collect the reward. At this time, Kim Suho finally relaxed quite a bit, but when he looked toward the place where the monster had disappeared, he froze completely. Curious, I approached him and asked what was wrong, only to find out he had seen a fallen branch. After checking the surroundings, Kim Suho confirmed that the dungeon's final reward was indeed just an ordinary branch. At this, Kim Suho was completely dumbfounded. He couldn't believe all their efforts had yielded nothing. Seeing Kim Suho's dejection, I understood the cause of his frustration. Just as I was about to tell him that this branch was a valuable item, voices suddenly came from behind us. This familiar voice startled me, and turning around, indeed, it was the djinns from the Masked Demon's master. Their return was quicker than I had expected. After spotting me and Kim Suho, the two began to interrogate us. The bald djinn was angry about the intrusion, while the blonde djinn said their guild had long since applied to conquer this dungeon, and our entry was against the rules. Hearing this, I apologized to them first and explained that we were cube cadets, just passing by, and had looked inside and incidentally killed a monster. But while I spoke, I secretly hid the branch behind my back. At this moment, the blonde djinn wanted to know what the reward was, to which I replied that no reward had spawned here. Seeing this, the blonde djinn called their guild leader to report, but before he could finish, Kim Jin-kyung's voice came through, ordering our execution. Kim Suho and I also heard this command. The blonde djinn coldly said that our curiosity had doomed us. Immediately after, his magic power erupted, separating me and Kim Suho with a barrier of red magic. Once I could no longer see Kim Suho, I realized it was an isolation barrier. While I was worried about Kim Suho, the presence of the bald djinn also made me uneasy. The two axes emblazoned on his clothing indicated his hero level was intermediate. Pretending not to know he was a djinn, I challenged the bald djinn, questioning why a hero would attack a cadet, but the bald djinn considered me as good as dead, feeling no need to explain. As his magic was released, the overwhelming power quickened my heartbeat. The bald djinn's strength far surpassed mine. Killing me would be effortless, but that didn't mean I had no way to win. Seeing me reach behind, the bald djinn grabbed his axe to defend himself, but to his surprise, I pulled out a small stone. At first, he was completely confused and then couldn't help but laugh, thinking I was about to pull out some secret weapon, but it was just a small stone. However, I smiled and said, "This would be more than enough to deal with someone like you." At these words, the bald djinn became instantly angry. He was curious why I was so confident despite apparently having no magic power. Thinking I was scared, the bald djinn was taken aback when I threw the stone directly at him. Although he dodged successfully, the string attached to the stone puzzled him. Seeing his confusion, I knew the time was right, so I forcefully pulled the ether. When the bald djinn realized something was amiss, the stone had already hit his head. This stone had been randomly enhanced, and its powerful force knocked the bald djinn out instantly. Watching him crash heavily to the ground, I breathed a sigh of relief. The day's battles had drained too much of my physical and stigma magic energy, and I was now extremely exhausted. Fortunately, the djinn had let his guard down, or else this move would have been difficult to execute. I slowly approached, preparing to end him with a shot. Djinns recover quickly, so I had to act fast. Although a shotgun would have been ideal, my magic power was nearly depleted, so I chose an enhanced magic bullet instead. As the gunshot sounded, the situation before me was shocking, as the bullet capable of shattering rocks did not penetrate the djinn's head. The bald djinn had already woken up, and this had all happened in just a few seconds. Seeing this, I aimed to fire again, but the Jin merely roared, and his powerful magic sent me flying. The sudden change caught me off guard. Despite having etheric defenses, I still sustained severe injuries. A mere sound from the opponent had such tremendous power. I had completely enraged the bald Jin. He had not intended to reveal his true identity, but now that he no longer underestimated me, he directly used the Jin's special ability, demonification. Watching his displayed form and stronger aura, a sense of despair suddenly rose in my heart. Meanwhile, Kim Suho was also facing the blonde Jin. Going back to when we were separated, Kim Suho tried to call out loudly to me but couldn't hear any response. At that moment, he realized he was completely isolated. With no way to retreat and facing an enemy full of killing intent, Kim Suho had no choice but to draw his sword and prepare for a fight to the death. The blonde Jin's name is James, and he actually knew Kim Suho, the top-ranked student at Magic Cube. If he could be recruited into the guild, he would be a great help. However, since the guild leader had already ordered his elimination, James couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. The next second, he instantly attacked Kim Suho. The enemy was too fast, and Kim Suho barely had time to react. Although he narrowly avoided a fatal blow when James swung his sword, he was still slashed across the cheek. After steadying himself on the ground with his hands, Kim Suho attempted a side kick, but before he could make contact, James had already disappeared. Fortunately, this strike gave Kim Suho a chance to catch his breath. However, seeing James land in the distance, Kim Suho was greatly surprised, as the enemy's speed far exceeded his own. Before he could think of a strategy, Kim Suho suddenly felt a sharp pain. Looking down, he realized his leg had been slashed. This meant that in a very short time, the opponent had not only dodged but also counterattacked with his sword. James' speed made Kim Suho even more cautious, unsure if he could keep up with the enemy's pace, but he had to try. Kim Suho began to focus and observe, and at this moment, James attacked him again. This time, Kim Suho successfully saw the enemy's movement and reacted in time to block the attack. After successfully blocking this strike, Kim Suho engaged in an intense battle with James, but always reacting passively was not a solution. If he could attack the enemy's vulnerabilities in close quarters, he might have a chance to take the initiative. Soon, James' sword blade slashed Kim Suho's face. Seeing this, James was dissatisfied, as what was meant to be a fatal attack had not even caused serious injury. But the next moment, James sensed something was off because he saw a cold sword light. Kim Suho had intentionally allowed himself to be injured to swing his sword at close range. Even with James' speed, he could not completely evade it. After being slashed on the thigh, James was greatly shocked. Watching the enemy again distance himself significantly, Kim Suho felt it was a pity he hadn't caused a serious injury. After several exchanges, Kim Suho could feel that the person before him was not as powerful as the Chaos Knight. Yet, it was difficult to find the opponent's weak points. At this moment, he couldn't help but think that if I were also there, we could definitely defeat the enemy before us. However, assumptions were useless, as this was his own battle. Kim Suho's talent made him almost divinely skilled in swordsmanship, and now that his opponent was also a swordsman, he had a way to win. To defeat the formidable opponent before him, Kim Suho finally stopped holding back and unleashed all his magical power. Suddenly, the special magic of a sword saint enveloped the entire area. This power startled James. Even knowing that Kim Suho was the top student at Magic Cube, he had still regarded Kim Suho as just a child. But now, James dared not take him lightly and decided to end the battle with the next move. Kim Suho had the same idea, concentrating all his magic into his sword. However, the next second, he heard heartbeat sounds, but these were not from the enemy. Soon, Kim Suho remembered this feeling was the same as when he first discovered the dungeon, as if someone was calling to him. The branch nearby, bathed in the sword saint's magic, even reciprocated energy to Kim Suho. Meanwhile, my situation was dire. After the bald Jin transformed, his power grew even stronger. At this moment, the magic left in my stigma was too weak to counterattack. Looking at the grimacing Jin, I realized I had no chance of winning and couldn't even run away. The Jin suddenly lunged at me, ready to kill me. Just as I closed my eyes to accept, I felt droplets of blood hit my face, but I felt no pain. When I opened my eyes, the scene before me was unbelievable because the demon had been killed by a black spike. As the demon fell, a beautiful figure slowly appeared. Unexpectedly, the person who saved me was the captain. A common branch that Kim Suho had despised turned out to be a legendary god-slaying weapon. Just when I was about to be killed by the demon, the captain suddenly appeared and saved me. I was curious why she was here, as it was too coincidental. At this time, the injured part of my body was still in severe pain. In my current state, if the captain wanted to attack me, I had no ability to defend myself. According to the setup, the chameleon troupe indeed intersects with the masked demon's master, but she shouldn't have appeared before me. Moreover, this wasn't the first time the captain had actively sought me out. She then approached and slowly extended her hand, a gesture I didn't understand. She also formally said she was pleased to meet me. I had thought the captain had come with malicious intent, but it turned out otherwise. After calming down, I smiled and mentioned that we really must have fate, always meeting like this. The captain firmly stated that our meetings were inevitable because she had been keeping an eye on me. She candidly told me why. Hearing that the captain had been focusing on me, I was very puzzled and curious about about her intentions. Just then, an undead suddenly launched a sneak attack on the captain. I quickly warned her of the danger, but the next second I knew my warning was redundant. I didn't even see her move, and the undead was instantly reduced to ashes in front of me. After this brief incident, the captain suddenly said she had something to tell me, then came closer and revealed her purpose. In just a few words, I finally remembered what was amiss. Because in the original story, there is this plot, but it was intended for Shin Jong-hak to coax him into joining the chameleon troupe. But now, it seemed that because of my actions, the original storyline had been completely disrupted. I was about to confirm this with the captain when she turned her head and noticed that the Jin's barrier had disappeared. To avoid being discovered, the captain prepared to leave. Before leaving, she left me with a phrase to consider, then transformed into a purple liquid and quickly departed from the area. The sudden turn in the plot left me completely unresponsive. Fortunately, Kim Suho's voice woke me up. The barrier had disappeared because he had dealt with the blonde Jin. Hearing that he had defeated his opponent, I felt much more relieved. With Kim Suho's support, I managed to stand up from the ground. Today's exertion was especially tremendous, and now Kim Suho asked me how we should handle the people behind us. Looking at the blonde man, he seemed to have been merely knocked out, with no signs of demonification. After thinking it over, Kim Suho felt we should report the opponent to the association. Hearing this, I quickly said they had legally entered the dungeon, and since we had sneaked in without declaring, if we reported it, we might also be punished. Fortunately, Kim Suho thought what I said made sense. Otherwise, things would have been difficult to resolve. My money was mostly bet on the masked demon's master, and if it were discovered that the blonde man was a Jin, all my previous investments would be ruined. On the way, Kim Suho wanted to know where the person I had dealt with had gone. Regarding this, I didn't expose the captain, but said that the person had escaped. By the time we got down the mountain, it was already deep into the night. As Kim Suho helped me sit down to rest, he also carefully looked around. The backlash from the first time exhausting the magic power of the stigma made it difficult for me to walk. At this moment, Kim Suho seemed to have something on his mind. He took out the branch from before and then told me that it was not an ordinary item. I then remembered that I had forgotten about this when we left. Now Kim Suho said that he had felt the power of the branch during the fight. It seemed to be calling to him. However, Kim Suho couldn't understand that state, nor did he know how to describe it. I told him I understood because this thing looked very powerful. As the dungeon's completion reward, this seemingly ordinary branch actually had a terrifyingly significant background. I asked Kim Suho if he had ever heard the story of the Mistiltine, a legendary weapon in mythology that transformed into a sword to slay the god of light. Hence, the Mistiltine is also known as the Godslayer stick. Hearing this, Kim Suho was incredulous. Could the branch before us be a mythical item? To this, I nodded affirmatively, adding that to make a divine weapon reveal its form, it first needs to awaken. At this, Kim Suho also understood that the branch was not in its complete form. I hadn't expected that Kim Suho, relying only on the unawakened Mistiltine, could defeat a demon on his own. Although in my setting, it indeed is a powerful weapon. Kim Suho wanted to know how to awaken the Mistiltine, so I asked him to place the branch on the ground. Seeing me looking for something, Kim Suho was puzzled about what I was doing, but when I took out the sapling powder, he was instantly captivated by the shimmering powder. I told him it was an artifact that might come in handy. Seeing this, Kim Suho thought it was a very precious thing. The sapling powder was already something he had, but it wasn't easy for me to obtain it from the captain. Then I pondered how to make Kim Suho more grateful to me. The next second, I jokingly said it was my parents' relic. As soon as I said this, Kim Suho was immediately stunned. Seeing his petrified expression, I realized the joke had gone a bit too far. Seeing his teary-eyed look, I quickly explained I was just joking. I just wanted to express how important this thing was to me, while also explaining the benefits of the sapling powder. Whether applied to people or objects, it can accelerate the unlocking of potential. In short, if the powder is applied to the Mistiltine, it will surely cause a unique transformation. After explaining, I prepared to begin, but Kim Suho was initially startled. Then he reached out to stop me. He felt that gaining something so precious without giving anything in return left him feeling bewildered. Hearing this, I thought that now was the time to make full use of it, especially since it would be hard to get such a mythological weapon in the future. As I slowly poured the sapling powder onto the branch, blue lights soon began to emerge from it. Under our watchful eyes, the surface of the small branch started to crack. Once the Mistiltine completed its initial metamorphosis, the originally dry ordinary branch sprouted several new tender leaves. After Kim Suho picked up the Mistiltine, he couldn't believe what I said was true. This was the first awakening of the god-slaying stick. Afterward, as long as Kim Suho continues to defeat enemies, it will gradually transform into the shape of a sword. After everything was done, I stood up. According to our previous agreement, I took the leaves of the Mistiltine, while the branch itself belonged to Kim Suho. I asked him if he had any objections, and of course, Kim Suho agreed. But along the way, he asked me many times, feeling it was too unfair to me, and even suggested we share the weapon. Out of necessity, I told Kim Suho that I completely dislike close combat. For me, having the leaves is enough. The leaves of the Mistiltine, a byproduct of its awakening, not only strengthen the body, but can also be made into a formidable weapon. After checking the effects of the leaves, I felt very satisfied. As for how to use them, that can be considered later. Just then, I accidentally tripped over a root and fell to the ground. Already exhausted, being tripped by the root instantly worsened my mood. However, this familiar scenario reminded me of my previous encounters. Hearing the noise, Kim Suho came back and asked what had happened. I told him it was nothing, just that I had accidentally fallen. Now my mood was even happier because my backpack unexpectedly contained an expensive wild ginseng. Meanwhile, in the Jin's den, Jane was watching my battle process. It was recorded by the captain. Seeing how I could still exert powerful force with a small stone despite being out of magic, Jane couldn't help but admire my prowess. But what pleased her most was my extremely rational judgment during the battle. Jane and the captain had originally thought I would be frightened by the opponent's demonic form. Nevertheless, I maintained unwavering intent to kill, which both Jane and the captain highly appreciated. Jane commented that the captain had good judgment this time, and Kim Ha-jin is definitely a promising talent. At this point, the captain called Jane to leave, but Jane wanted to watch the entire video. She wanted to see what the demonization looked like. The captain then expressed that she didn't like the demon's appearance. As for the reason, she thought it was too disgusting. After a while, I finally arrived at the academy's dormitory. As I pushed open the door, I was so exhausted mentally and physically, and my body ached all over. If I don't rest now, I think there's a high chance I might actually drop dead. I had just walked in, not expecting Evangel to get up sleepily. I felt sorry for disturbing her sleep, and then I held Evangel in my arms. There was too much that had happened today. It would have to wait until tomorrow to be digested. At that moment, I was drawn to the full moon in the sky because Kim Suho's words had also made me think of my family again. Just as he and I arrived at the X-City platform, Kim Suho told me to go back to Magic Cube first. Since he had already come this far, he planned to visit his family first and then return. As we were parting, Kim Suho suddenly stopped me, thanking me again for my help. He knew that without me coming along, he definitely couldn't have conquered this dungeon. In my heart, this experience with Kim Suho made me trust him even more. Kim Suho is a perfect protagonist. He never compromises and is the most righteous hero in the world. In reality, people like Kim Suho are extremely rare, but originally, I was still full of hope when I created him like this. Because with Kim Suho, a savior who protects the world, I thought surviving in this world should not be difficult. He is also the person I trust most in this world. A few days later, on a deep mountain in South Hamgyong of the neighboring country, there was a secret cave, which was a shelter for one of the demonic organizations known as Nine Evils. In my novel world, the English Association marked a group of demons as 9 sources of evil, a term meant to be pejorative, yet the demons gladly accepted it. Defiance, the top ranked among them, even established a corresponding demonic organization, considering this title a praise. Tomer had returned to the shelter, which surprised the other members. Usually, at this time, Tomer would not be in the office because she wasn't very interested in the organization's missions. Just as someone was discussing whether Tomer was really a djinn or not, a man suddenly opened the door. Seeing him, the other members quickly bowed their heads to work. The man who walked in called out to Tomer. Hearing the call, Tomer knew there must be some troublesome task for her to do. As she expected, the man handed her some documents, stating that even though Tomer's strength was elite, it would be troubling for her to be consistently excluded from missions. Listening, Tomer realized she couldn't avoid it this time, so she took the documents and asked for the information about the mission. The man asked her to check the documents herself. To Tomer's surprise, the task seemed not too difficult because it was just an observation mission. The object of observation was a student from the Magic Cube's class of truth. Meanwhile, I was running errands off campus, and after waiting a while, someone behind me called my name. The person asked if I had booked a magic imprint. After confirmation, the man smiled slightly and then introduced himself. The man's name was Jin Hosung, a 4-star magician responsible for imprinting me. A 4-star magician in the field of magic tool imprinting is basically the highest talent ordinary people can encounter. Having him do the imprinting, I felt indeed very lucky. But soon, I noticed something was off because Jin Hosung kept sizing me up. After scanning my attire, his attitude suddenly changed, and he coldly told me to follow him. Before coming, I had guessed that magicians would judge by appearances, so I had dressed up specially, but it seemed I still couldn't meet their standards. After entering Jin Hosung's office, he asked me what kind of magic imprint I needed. When I mentioned that I wanted an imprint to enhance my physique or related to defense, Jin Hosung quickly snapped his fingers, and several options appeared behind him for me to choose from, but I wasn't satisfied with any of them. This time, I was here to have an imprint made on a bracelet I had won previously. I needed a magic imprint that required a lot of magic power but was extremely effective. I was about to tell Jin Hosung my requirements when I noticed he was nonchalantly drinking tea. His attitude had become very poor since the beginning. It seemed he had judged from my attire that I couldn't afford expensive magic imprints. At this rate, I worried he wouldn't take care when imprinting, so I coughed a few times to get his attention. I told Jin Hosung that I wasn't here for minor imprints but needed a powerful one that required strong magic to activate, like enhanced protection energy or instant awakening with dual attributes. Just as Jin Hosung was about to say it was possible, I suddenly asked, "Is this too difficult for a 4-star magician? With that, Jin Hosung was taken aback, feeling underestimated. The next second, I stood up, ready to leave, indicating that I was in a hurry and would have to come back next time if it wasn't possible. Seeing me question his capability again, Jin Hosung quickly waved his hands to explain that he could indeed imprint such magic, but he was worried that the customer couldn't afford the price. Seeing that I seemed very angry, Jin Hosung quickly asked about my budget. I explained my requirements and budget in detail. After hearing my budget, magician Jin Hosung was instantly excited, completely captivated by the money. He not only had his staff bring me a new cup of tea, but also said he would show me a higher grade imprint catalog later. The day after the affair was concluded, I returned to Magic Cube. Before class today, everyone was buzzing with conversation. I was also in a good mood. The dungeon at Gamuk Mountain was conquered. Kim Suho had obtained a Mastiltine, and I had entrusted Jin Hosung to make the imprint. Although each matter had its twists and turns, fortunately, everything went smoothly, so I was very happy. Once the instructor started the class, everyone quieted down. The instructor announced a new notice. Starting today, we would be re-teaming, forming groups of 5 for upcoming activities. I wasn't surprised by this. At the beginning of the new term, the school usually has everyone form teams to complete homework, then carry out raids on mini towers, or have class clashes and bonding trips. The instructor asked everyone to find teammates according to their needs and submit the list by next Wednesday. If not decided by then, random teams would be formed. As someone who was basically isolated in the class, I could only wait for the random teaming next week. While I was sitting quietly alone, I heard a tapping sound from behind. Although other students were enthusiastically inviting each other, I still heard this subtle sound. The person tapping the desk was Rachel, looking troubled right behind me. Seeing this, I remember that her situation was probably similar to mine, but there was a difference. After all, I was simply ignored, whereas Rachel's princess status created some distance. Then I thought this could be an opportunity to form a team, especially since I still needed to give Rachel the butterfly sapling's dust. According to the original plot, she should have received a hint to open her eyes during the last term's event, and delaying could affect her strength. So, I drafted a message, preparing to invite her to team up with me. After sending it, I nervously turned to look at Rachel. She sighed in her seat first, but the next second, she received the message I sent. This was my second time actively inviting her, and I didn't know if Rachel would continue to refuse. Just as the message popped up, Rachel hadn't seen it yet, and someone called her name from beside her. I was very surprised to see the person who came, because Tomer, of all people, was inviting Rachel to team up with her. Seeing it was an unfamiliar magician, not only was Rachel puzzled, but the surrounding students were also confused. For a while, many people were discussing why Jamer wanted to team up with Rachel. Jamer is an alias of Tomer, and her behavior exceeded my expectations, and she specifically sought out Rachel because Tomer's organization Situational Evil functions like a mercenary group among demons. Given the recent situation, it is highly probable that someone was directing this from behind. As for those who would target Rachel, I could only think of one person, the former captain of the Royal Guard of England Imperial family, Lancaster. Rachel was indeed surprised by Tomer's sudden invitation. However, there was still plenty of time, so she said she needed to think about it first. Hearing this, Tomer also smiled and agreed. After she left, Rachel finally remembered to check the message she had just received. Upon opening it and seeing it was from me, she turned to look at me. Seeing me looking uncomfortable and worried, Rachel suddenly shifted her gaze away, no longer looking at me. Just when I thought I was going to be rejected again, Rachel's message came through. Like her response to Tomer, she said she would think about it before deciding. Seeing this, I calmed down. It wasn't a direct rejection like before, so I might as well wait patiently. But what I hadn't noticed was that after sending the message, Rachel no longer appeared dejected but seemed very happy. At this time, many people had already found their teams, but Chai Nyan was still struggling to choose. She had already found 2 teammates the day before, but choosing the next candidate left Chai Nyan deep in thought. The remaining ones had to be chosen from students ranked below 100. Although there are bonus points for teaming up with lower ranked students, rarely are they powerful. If she had to choose, there was actually only one who met her expectations. This teaming was also somewhat beyond my expectations. Originally, I was largely ignored in class, but now many students came to ask me to team up. Some even offered museum tickets to entice me, inviting me to see the handguns there. Those who wanted to team up with me brought various gifts, all very enthusiastic. Although in Chai Nyan's view, my popularity was only limited to the teaming phase, in her heart, her choice was also me. After all, having me on the team could also compensate for her theoretical classes. Chai Nyan thought that if she personally approached Kim Hajin, it shouldn't be difficult, but the reason she hesitated and hadn't actively approached yet was because she worried that if she took the initiative, I might think she was interested in me, although she really just wanted to complete the team formation ordinarily. Just then, the voice from behind interrupted Chai Nyan's thoughts. Seeing it was Shin Jonghak telling her not to fret, she told him to mind his own business. Shin Jonghak didn't mind and said that the remaining choices were all more or less the same, just pick a few at random and train more later. Hearing this, Chai Nyan didn't take his advice, saying she had her own plans. Upon Upon hearing this, Shin Jong-hak became curious about her plans, so he suddenly snatched her notebook. By the time Chai Na-yeon rushed over, he had already flipped open the notebook and read aloud the list of candidates Chai Na-yeon had written in front of everyone. Soon, the next name made Shin Jong-hak stop in disbelief, and he called out my name in surprise. Due to Shin Jong-hak's loud voice, it caught the attention of other students. As for Chai Na-yeon, she was so embarrassed that she was practically petrified on the spot. I also noticed their situation, and when I heard people discussing me and Kim Ha-jin, Chai Na-yeon's face instantly turned red. On the other side, Shin Jong-hak was very confused since she had previously said she disliked me. Before he could continue to inquire, Chai Na-yeon, now furious, punched Shin Jong-hak and then snatched back her notebook, admonishing him not to snoop around in other people's stuff. After speaking, she stormed back to her seat, but upon realizing that I was also looking at her, Chai Na-yeon quickly turned her head away, avoiding further eye contact with me. Her mysterious behavior naturally left me somewhat baffled. After class, the instructor told everyone to take their time deciding on the list. While people were chatting with me in the hallway, Chai Na-yeon finally made up her mind. She then grabbed my arm. Seeing this, I asked her if there was something she needed. Chai Na-yeon was a bit stuttering and unclear in her speech. Just as she asked me if I had formed a team, Rachel suddenly appeared and told me that she had already submitted the team list. Hearing this, Chai Na-yeon was puzzled about what list Rachel was referring to, and Rachel told her that it was because I had decided to team up with her. Upon hearing this, Chai Na-yeon's mind went blank. She turned her head to look at me for confirmation, and I gave her an affirmative answer. Rachel had just finished considering and had agreed to form a team. In response, Chai Na-yeon spoke somewhat incoherently, asking me not to misunderstand her words. She was just afraid that no one would want to team up with me. As fellow members of the travel club, she also thought of helping however she could. After saying this, Chai Na-yeon congratulated me on finding a teammate and prepared to leave while patting my shoulder to encourage me. Rachel appeared somewhat worried about her unusual behavior. After walking a short distance, Chai Na-yeon couldn't help but overthink. Rachel, like herself, is a swordsman and has a similar physique. Excluding the theoretical parts, their achievements are not much different, but Chai Na-yeon didn't understand why I chose Rachel and not her. After Chai Na-yeon walked down the stairs, Rachel and I began discussing team matters. However, Rachel was concerned about the recent events, worried that I might suddenly go to another group, anxiously asking about it. Hearing this, I decisively said I wouldn't. Just then, the rest of the group members also came over. This included Jin Ho-sung, who was in my group last semester. He was happy that I could team up with him again. Actually, inviting Jin Ho-sung was Rachel's decision. I just respected her arrangement. The other members were Lee Bakyu and Tomer. Although I understood Tomer must have her plans, with me around, it should be fine. Jin Ho-sung suggested we all go out to eat together to foster friendship, which Rachel agreed to. As for what to eat, she wasn't picky, but I knew she had a favorite restaurant, so I suggested we dine at Hankyu-jong near the school. Hearing my decision, Rachel seemed very surprised. She hadn't expected that I also liked this restaurant. Jin Ho-sung also said that the food there was very tasty. After deciding, our group set off for Hankyu-jong. On the other hand, Chai Na-yeon returned to the dorm. Her team was now complete, with Hazuki among them. She thought the team was top-notch, since Chai Na-yeon could be the sharpshooter and Hazuki could serve as the warrior. However, Hazuki curiously asked, wasn't Kim Ha-jin invited to join the team? Chai Na-yeon explained that if she had wanted to invite him, he would definitely have joined. But then, Rachel's team would have been left with just a bunch of nobodies. Hearing her say this, Hazuki also thought it made sense. Once the list was confirmed, Chai Na-yeon submitted it. With the teaming issue finally resolved, she breathed a sigh of relief and wanted to lie down and rest for a while, but she couldn't fall asleep no matter what. Chai Na-yeon now regretted not inviting Kim Ha-jin from the start, so she wouldn't have to worry about theoretical grades. She realized it was her hesitation that let others get ahead. The memory of losing to Rachel in the last midterm exam was still fresh, and this team formation was sure to affect the subsequent rankings. Thinking about this made Chai Na-yeon even more agitated, worried about losing to Rachel again. Of course, Rachel on the other side was unaware of this. She was still blissfully enjoying her meal. Time quickly moved to the next week, and all the team lists had been confirmed. We also had our first class after forming the teams. Today's lesson was about leading the small group to explore dungeons. Generally, when a new dungeon is discovered, the guild sends an advance party to understand the internal situation. Our team had now been inside the dungeon for about 20 minutes. Due to the cold environment, everyone was feeling chilly. At that moment, Rachel noticed the situation ahead and quickly alerted everyone. It turned out that multiple different pathways had appeared ahead, so choosing the right path became crucial. However, Tomer randomly picked one and suggested we take it, saying it was useless to fret over choosing a path. But her choice was met with my opposition. Hearing me so certain that it wasn't the right path, Tomer seemed a bit angry. She didn't understand why I was so sure. My explanation was that my vision is quite good, and I could generally make out the correct path. As for Tomer's intentions, I didn't need to guess. She definitely wanted to lead us into a trap. Tomer, refuted by me, looked towards Rachel, hoping the team leader would make the decision. Rachel decided decided to trust me. Hearing this, Tomer felt a bit embarrassed and still quietly insisted on her own opinion. Eventually, I chose a path, and as we slowly moved forward, we discovered one of the monsters we needed to investigate. Everyone was surprised when we saw the Yeti, and they understood that the path I had chosen was the right one. During the subsequent exploration, even though I was obstructing her, Tomer kept leading us into danger, despite her attempts to create situations that would trap Rachel at times. With me there, she was doomed to fail. Tomer was angry at the repeated failures. She hadn't expected it to be so hard to get someone injured and leave the team. From the start, every decision I made avoided danger. Tomer understood that with me there, she couldn't succeed. Tomer called Rachel aside, using the excuse that exploring in two groups would be more efficient, and tried to get Rachel to explore elsewhere with her, adding that always trusting me was not good. Just as Rachel was about to refuse her suggestion, I stepped forward first and told Tomer that splitting up now would only delay us further. If they followed me, we could finish the class quickly. After saying this, I grabbed Rachel and walked away, Jin Hozung and Lee Bakyu naturally following me, leaving Tomer even more infuriated. Tomer couldn't understand what made me so confident. As for the answer, I certainly wouldn't tell her. The next second, I continued using my 1,000-mile eye to scout ahead. We were now close to our destination. After determining the best route, I told everyone to continue forward. Rachel was still a bit slow to react. Before long, we arrived at the endpoint smoothly. The instructor was waiting there for each team's students. At that moment, Rachel finally called out to me, timidly reminding me about my hand. Seeing this, I quickly let go of Rachel's hand and apologized to her, explaining that I had forgotten because I was focused on hurrying. However, Rachel wasn't upset and told me there was no need to apologize. The instructor then loudly called our group to report. After telling the instructor about our explorations along the way and analyzing the dungeon's boss monster level, our team's response was affirmed by the instructor, who praised us for doing a perfect job. In the end, our group completed the course with full marks. Everyone was surprised and didn't expect to receive such praise from the instructor. Compared to everyone else's excitement and happiness, Tomer in the background seemed very out of place. Because of my involvement today, her mission hadn't progressed at all. Initially, when she received the mission, she was indifferent because all Tomer had to do was to get close to Rachel and then cause her to be injured or weakened. Once Rachel's daily life was disrupted, the rest would be handled by other key personnel. So this mission, no matter how you looked at it, seemed very simple. Tomer was confident at the base, but after the dungeon exploration, she was completely taken aback. After returning from the course, Tomer couldn't even make contact. At that moment, a key member of the Evil inquired why the mission was delayed and if there had been any complications. Hearing this, Tomer immediately flew into a rage. The mission had just started, and they were already rushing her. After venting at the key members, Tomer began to consider how to proceed with the mission. She knew clearly why the dungeon attempt failed. It was all because of Kim Ha-jin. It was as if he had telepathy. Whenever she tried to make a move, he would immediately stop her. And no matter whether it was during or outside of classes, I was always hovering around Rachel. So, up to now, Tomer had made no progress. After looking through information about me for a long time, Tomer didn't find anything particularly noteworthy. She suspected I thought that by always staying by Rachel, I could win her over. Just as this thought crossed her mind, Tomer instantly believed she understood the situation. Kim Ha-jin must like Rachel, hence he kept hovering around her. Thinking of this, Tomer suddenly had a good idea. If she exaggerated the story and then spread the news that Kim Ha-jin liked Rachel, as more people came to know about it, she believed the two of them would drift apart. At that time, she could easily complete the organization's mission. The first step to spread this news was for Tomer to start building closer relationships with other members of the group. A few days passed, and today's class was on phenomenology analysis. Just before the class was about to end, the teacher asked everyone to first look at a map of a small dungeon, then analyze and present effective raid strategies. This group assignment made many people sigh in frustration, but Jin Hozun's troubles were feigned because with me and Rachel present, he really didn't need to worry. He even turned around and expressed his trust that I would surely get a high grade. Jin Hozun's praise only made me feel more pressured. When the bell rang for class to end, the class president informed everyone that there would be a team leader meeting next Wednesday, and all team leaders needed to gather in the auditorium. After the announcement, everyone began to pack up and leave. Meanwhile, I suggested to Rachel and the others that we could go to a coffee shop to briefly assign tasks and then disperse to go home. Rachel agreed to this. However, Tomer suddenly came up and said, since that was the plan, we might as well chat while eating cake. Her uncharacteristically friendly attitude made me suspicious of her intentions. After I questioned her, Tomer continued to respond enthusiastically, saying she wanted to foster friendship with everyone, even turning to proactively greet Lee Bakyu and the others. Her active behavior was even more suspicious, but I still didn't understand the intent behind Tomer's change in attitude. Soon, we arrived at the coffee shop. Even though I had already used 1,000-mile eye to check the surroundings and confirm there were no traps, I still found Tomer very suspicious. It wasn't until Rachel called me that I came back to my senses, ready to assign tasks. After some thought, I decided to send Hozung and Bakyu to find information about the dungeon, while Tomer and Rachel were responsible for calculating the magical energy density. After they sent me the results, I would summarize them and finally present them on the day the assignment was due. Everyone agreed to my assignments. Tomer said that was all for the group work discussion. Lee Bakyu had been a bit worried before, but discussing their respective tasks reassured him a lot. He then enviously remarked that not only was I good at studies, but after transitioning to shooter, my combat level must have greatly improved as well. Following that, Lee Bakyu curiously asked whether any famous guilds had approached me yet. I did not answer that question. At that moment, Rachel quietly tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Has the England imperial family contacted you?" I was puzzled, not understanding what Rachel meant, so she explained that it was the England Imperial Family Guild. After thinking for a while, I finally remembered receiving an email. I somewhat embarrassingly told Rachel that I don't often check my emails. Hearing that the Royal Guild had only sent one email made Rachel somewhat uncomfortable. I then opened the email to check its contents, and indeed, it was a preliminary contact invitation. However, the offer they made was quite average and, as a condition for signing early, it was not particularly good. At that moment, Rachel also wanted to see the email, but just as she had read part of it, her expression quickly turned sour. The way the Royal Guild handled things made Rachel feel they were too perfunctory. She then stood up to leave, telling me not to continue reading. After speaking, Rachel informed everyone that she had to leave early. Seeing this, Tomer was dumbfounded again. Her plans for the day hadn't even started, and Rachel had already left. As for me and Jin Ho-sung, we were also surprised, not understanding what had happened, as Rachel had clearly been upset just now. While Tomer was still complaining internally about how things were not going smoothly, she realized that everyone was concerned about Rachel's departure. This might be a good opportunity for her to start spreading rumors. When I also left, Tomer suddenly struck up a conversation with Lee Bakyu, quietly saying, "Don't you think Hajin likes Rachel?" The next morning, I went to the physical training room as usual for my workout. The rest period after each workout is the happiest time. Although I have been consistently exercising, unfortunately, my physical fitness hasn't improved much. Just after finishing my workout, I didn't even have the strength to open a soda can. Just as I was about to try later, someone offered me a hand. Hearing the person's voice, I was surprised because the person who helped me with the soda can was Chai Nayun. She mentioned she had something she wanted to talk to me about. Hearing this, I became interested and invited Chai Nayun to speak her mind. She seemed a bit embarrassed and stuttered for a while before she explained the reason for her visit. It turned out their group had chosen the Honshin Mantis dungeon, and they were supposed to present it in class next Friday, so she wanted to ask if I knew anything about it. I was puzzled as to why they had specifically chosen the most difficult dungeon. Chai Nayun explained that she didn't initially want to choose this dungeon, but a stubborn sorcerer in the group strongly insisted on it. After repeated requests from this person, the others reluctantly agreed. I recalled that the magician in Chai Nayun's group was probably named Oh Junshik, known for his strong abilities but also for his vanity and lack of manners. Because of his affluent background, he was not intimidated by Chai Nayun. So, I decided to caution her and told Chai Nayun that the magician probably thought that a harder dungeon would score higher. When I asked if Oh Junshik was also the one to give the presentation, I immediately suggested that Chai Nayun urgently replace him. That guy named Oh Junshik, just from his appearance, seemed like a vain person. At the critical moment of presentation, he would surely become flustered. If he were responsible for the presentation, I definitively told Chai Nayun that her grades would plummet. Hearing this, Chai Nayun felt as if she had found a kindred spirit, as she felt the same way. She was initially prepared to turn a blind eye, but his behavior in the group was very exaggerated. Chai Nayun started to vent about Oh Junshik to me, and after a long talk, she concluded that he was the most outrageous person she had ever met. To this, I was somewhat surprised. Chai Nayun seemed quite self-aware. Next, I also advised her to hand over the task of presenting the strategy to Azuki, believing she was fully capable. While Chai Nayun also wanted to switch speakers, she estimated that Oh Junshik would definitely not agree. I continued to provide Chai Nayun with some dungeon intelligence, only to realize something odd. Had we really become so close that we could talk about anything? Chai Nayun, noticing my gaze, fell silent for a moment. Facing this awkward situation, Chai Nayun encouraged me to keep exercising and quickly left the area. Time quickly moved to the following Friday. After several groups had presented, it was Chai Nayun's group's turn. Oh Junshik was just as I had predicted. He was so nervous on stage that he stuttered and couldn't complete a sentence. Seeing Chai Nayun fuming below, I also felt sorry for her, and in the end, they hadn't managed to replace the speaker. Soon, Oh Junshik's terrible performance ended, but he showed no shame and even happily said he was just too nervous. Hearing Oh Junshik's words, Chai Nayun and Azuki were speechless to the extreme. Seeing his frivolous demeanor, if it weren't still during class, Chai Nayun would have stormed up to beat him. Azuki comforted her not to be impulsive, but Chai Nayun decided that after class, she would definitely make Oh Junshik regret his actions. At that moment, the teacher called the next group's speaker to the stage, and I walked up slowly as it was our group's turn. As I passed by her, Chai Nayun was momentarily stunned, surprised to see me wearing glasses. Unlike Oh Junshik's panic, I appeared quite composed. My performance was very calm. After telling everyone that our investigation was of the Wasin dungeon, I began explaining the strategy plan and results devised by our group. Just a few seconds in, even Chai Nayan was drawn in. She knew my written exam scores were good, but she didn't expect me to speak so well. After a while, the teacher couldn't help but ask a question, wanting to know how I managed to deduce the magic backlash from such little information. Hearing this, I smiled confidently, then showed the calculation process and gave everyone a detailed explanation. Everyone was surprised by my performance during the presentation, and Chai Nayan listened attentively to my speech. Watching me on the stage, Chai Nayan felt a strange sensation and her heartbeat quickened slightly. Just like other students had just mentioned, Kim Ha-jin on the stage seemed to have a bit of a teacher's demeanor. After finishing my speech, I returned to my seat and happily high-fived Rachel. Sneaking a glance behind, Chai Nayan saw our group's excited scene, and at that moment, she felt envious, though she remained haughty on the surface. After today's class, Rachel went to train. She had just finished her afternoon training plan. Overall, she had a very successful day, not only scoring high on the strategy presentation, but also successfully handing over the contract to Ha-jin. Originally, at the end of today's class, everyone asked to go out for a meal, but Rachel had training plans, so she didn't go. As I was also preparing to say goodbye, Rachel hurriedly remembered she had something to give me and quickly rummaged through her bag to pull out a contract, formally asking me to accept it. After I took it from her hand, Rachel then told me that it was a pre-employment agreement from the Royal Guild. She also explained that the guild had decided just by looking at the rankings, and the actual terms would be much better than what was mentioned in the email. After explaining, Rachel formally invited me to join the Royal Guild, asking me to seriously consider it. Returning to the present, Rachel felt that her performance had been quite good earlier, and she was in a good mood. She planned to quickly take a shower and then go back to the dorm to sleep well. But just as she was about to push the door open, she overheard people talking, and the conversation was about her. The phrase, "I heard Kim Ha-jin likes Rachel," immediately made her stop in her tracks. The more she listened, the more outrageous it got, with someone even saying I was about to confess to Rachel. After the shock, Rachel's pretty face instantly turned red. She couldn't help but think, does Ha-jin really like me?